Hey, everybody. I'm Eric Osborne, and I am welcoming you to episode 1 of my podcast. Now, this conversation today is one I've been waiting to have for a while. It's one that I have been having for a while, but I've never had it publicly. It's around suffering, but that's not unusual. Certainly, in content that I've made previously, we've talked about suffering. Suffering is a normal, ordinary part of life. There's all kinds of great reasons to suffer out there. But the kind of suffering that I would like us to explore today is something that very often not only doesn't get noticed, it is discredited or diminished when it is brought up. And what I'm talking about is the suffering of the successful. If you don't consider yourself a successful person, this is still for you, because if you're listening to my content, for one, I know that you're geared towards some kind of level of personal development. And as you achieve different levels of success, I want you to have fulfillment along the way. Those of you who do consider yourselves successful, you probably know what I'm talking about. You probably have felt a level of guilt or shame around being successful and still not feeling fulfilled. You look around and you see people out in the world who have obvious reason to be unhappy. And here you are with all of these accomplishments. You've achieved great levels of discipline. You have a beautiful family. You have a successful career. And yet somewhere there is either a quiet whisper or a grating scream that's telling you that you're actually a failure. I only know this because A, I've experienced it myself firsthand, and B, I've worked with a lot of people over the years who have been down that same road. All of us can look to public examples where we've seen folks who were very successful outwardly. Some were incredible entertainers who seemed extremely happy, comedians who kept everybody laughing while they themselves were tormented on the inside. And it doesn't have to be this way. I've seen people who have had enormous material success find the fulfillment that brought them inner peace, so that then their material success became even more impactful on the world around them. And that's what I want to help you do as well. Now, having success and not feeling fulfilled isn't a sign of ingratitude or hopelessness. It's actually calling you to your next level. It's a plateau that you may have reached that can become a launch pad to the next highest version of yourself. In our world, we often confuse achievement with self-actualization. That, once we have our base and fundamental needs of safety and emotional security met, then we can become these successful people, and that's supposed to take us to a level of constant fulfillment. But Maslow doesn't discuss the turmoil that can arise when you get to that highest point of material success and find out that there's nowhere else to go. The truth is that there is somewhere else to go, but we don't often talk about it. That place is inward. Probably going to think, are we about to get spiritual and woo-woo and talking about God? And the answer is yes, but not in the way that we typically do. Most of us grew up in a world of religious fundamentalism where God in the sky telling us that we're going to hell if we do right or wrong, or heaven, whatnot, case may be. Or we're in a world of scientific materialism that tells us that there's nothing else out there. There's just, you live, you die, you become dirt, and that's all there is to it. The truth is that neither one is completely right, and neither one can really keep us happy in and of themselves. We have to start finding an integrated approach. I'm grateful for the sciences that are now starting to illustrate that there is absolutely a mystical, invisible world that the material world springs from. I'm also grateful for the spiritual perspectives that are helping us understand that the material world and our desires, our flesh and blood, have great value, that heaven can actually be on earth. We don't have to wait until we, die and float off into the clouds before we actually experience fulfillment. No, we can have fulfillment here and now by balancing these two worlds. It's in this out of balance where our suffering ultimately comes from. And we can see this across the board. Like socially, we're seeing this right now without getting into politics. I do want to point out that the polarity is causing an enormous amount of misery in our population. We have to come back to balance. Let's not think about how we do that outside right now. Let's think about how we do that within our own selves. And then that we can begin to see radiating out into our families, our communities, and then our society at large. Now, in the work that I do, integration is I want to say overused word. It's a very used word, that's for sure. And I suspect that it has a richer application than is often applied. Yes, we can integrate our experiences and they can become a part of who we are. But when we consider ourselves as integrated people, that means understanding ourselves as multifaceted people functioning in different ways at once. Specifically, what I'm referring to here is being a spiritual person who still desires material success, being a materially successful person who still desires some level of inner development. You know there's a mystery. You know that there is some way all of this came into being. If you're a creative person, if you are someone who has brought your dreams to life, then you know that they came out of your imagination. Now, what we don't often consider is where does that imagination come from? This is part of where our malaise originates. We think that we are our successes. Beyond that, we think that our successes come from us. And what I'm going to invite us all to consider is the possibility that your inspirations, your thoughts, your achievements did not actually come from you, but came to you, that you were a vessel with which they passed into this world to help make this world a better place. And if you've not taken that into consideration, then that might be part of why you're feeling unfulfilled. It's the acknowledgement of the mystery. We don't have to call it God. Again, we don't have to get into this old school religious paradigm. We can understand that there is an ineffable mystery from which all creation springs, and that we are an incredible interface, and that our imagination is part of this interface, that our nervous system is part of this interface. You know, the therapies that I've worked in over the years with these plant medicines and what is being slowly understood through science and the interface of this nervous system is really helping us come to be aware that it is through our imagination, then our embodiment of this imagination, that we are bringing some kind of information that exists out there in the invisible realm into the physical realm. Now, this can be an amazing source of reflection. You can consider yourself a privileged component of that, but it's extremely important if we want actual fulfillment to acknowledge that we do not know what is behind that. I was listening to a quantum physicist the other day talking, I forget his name, but he was talking about how math can never prove consciousness because math comes from consciousness. And when I hear a scientist describing to me the ineffability of the mystery and the importance of acknowledging that mystery, it really supports this claim that I'm presenting to you, that without an acknowledged reflection and attribution to the invisible world, the source of all inspiration, the source of all being, without the acknowledgement, we're going to continually be unfulfilled. And there's probably some of you out there that are thinking, that's right, Eric. Without spiritual fulfillment, there is no fulfillment. Well, I'm here to tell you, without material fulfillment, there's no fulfillment either. You might argue, well, you can look back and see that the spiritual leaders are the ones who live the most fulfilled lives. That may have been the case in the past. There were cultures and societies that maybe took care of their monks. But I'm going to invite you to look into the world today and see those who live purely in the world of the mystery, the mystical world in our modern society. And you tell me how fulfilled they are. A lot of them are homeless. A lot of them are slowly dying on the streets. One of my great teachers, a man that I admire enormously and I've studied for many, many years, is the Emperor of Ethiopia. He was a priest and he was a king. And he has a quote that has stuck with me that I've been sitting with, particularly in the last few months, that material and spiritual progress are essential to mankind. We must work ceaselessly for the equal attainment of both. I believe that's the world that we live in today. And I believe that ultimately our misery and suffering comes from an imbalance in these two. Now, again, if I haven't said it already, please let me say this is not to be perceived as a criticism or a condemnation of anybody. It is natural that we are in the place that we're in. If you were raised in a religious family, then you were taught to run from money and materialism. And if you were raised in a material family, you were taught to get as far away as you can from the religious crazies. I get it. And look at where that's getting us. So, what do we do with this? We find balance. We learn how to meet the material self with the spiritual self, or vice versa. I think it's fairly obvious to most people that our society has put an incredible weight and level of importance on material success. And I'm not here to denigrate that. If it was strictly on spiritual growth, like we maybe could look at other cultures and see, then we could see imbalance, how that imbalance plays out. But in our culture where material success has been, considered the pinnacle of achievement, what we see is that the spiritual or inner qualities that have not been nurtured, are not strengthened, that this is where the collapse begins. And so the things that got us to where we are ultimately don't last. Everything peaks, everything plateaus. I look at it like a scaffolding, right? Scaffolds, if you're a builder, then you might know that scaffolds are used to help support the building of the structure, but they don't support the structure itself. If the scaffold alone is used to support the structure, then it may for a while, but eventually it's going to give way. And that's what the imbalance ultimately is. The material life alone is scaffolding. The spiritual life alone is scaffolding. The two of those together are an integrated building, an integrated being that can provide for lasting growth and real embodied success. So, for those of you who do consider yourself successful externally and are maybe experiencing this kind of suffering that I'm talking about, I would ask you to consider, has your outer world outgrown your inner world? Is it putting too much pressure on your inner world that you have not built a strong enough foundation to sustain? And then, if that's the case, how do we fix that? Well, there are ways, and it's not as difficult as you might think. It does not require you giving up all of your material success. It really just means coming back into balance. And we find the out of balanceness in our responsiveness. If you're becoming ultra controlling, you know you're out of balance. If you're finding yourself being very reactive, you know you're out of balance. If you find yourself running to alcohol or other substances in order to be able to finally relax a little bit, we know we're out of balance. Maybe your issue is like mine. You grew up with an inner world feeling like being needed is what helped you feel valuable. And so you gave way too much of yourself and you ended up just ultimately exhausted and thinking that nobody can do it but you. That's out of balance. But I want to encourage you that there is a way to get back into balance. And here's one of the last things I want to say before we end this episode out is that willpower is not going to get us there anymore. Willpower is powerful. For someone like yourself who is successful, willpower is what got you here, but it's not going to get you to the next level. It's not going to come from developing some new strategy or implementing some new program. The only strategy that there is that can help right now is acceptance. That's what I would invite you to do. Just accept where you are. I know it seems counterintuitive. It's the paradox, though. By accepting where we are, that somehow it's good for us, is what opens us up to a next level of possible growth, finding that balance. So, if you're interested in finding out more about how we can achieve balance in our lives, that's going to be the topic of the next episode. Until then, I want you to subscribe so you can get notified when that comes up and work with this acceptance. Just sit and be with what is. Okay, you're at a point now where you realize I can't go any further like this. I am actually miserable. I've been denying this to myself. I'm telling myself that I'm not miserable, and I actually am. It's going to be difficult to sit with. It's probably going to be helpful to talk with someone about it if you haven't yet. And not in a way that's complaining or even especially denigrating the way you feel. In a way that's accepting, it's acknowledging that what you feel is legitimate and that you are seeking a solution. Begin sitting with the question, where have these achievements come from? We don't have to accredit it to a deity or anything like that. We can just sit with the question of where it came. What purpose does it really serve us? This conversation wasn't meant to solve a problem. It's meant to consider a problem, to acknowledge a problem. Acknowledgement is the first step.